Welcome to Module 2 of English 100. In this module, we will be looking at academic writing and academic integrity. Both of these things are incredibly important across all the courses you will take in the EA or ELCC programs. So, academic writing is going to be quite different from a lot of high school writing assignments, as well as any other writing you might do casually. Because at the college level, there's a lot more focus on a number of things that help to support the information you are providing, as well as to create a consistent structure so that whether somebody is reading this in Canada or somebody is reading this in another country, they can still anticipate and expect certain things to occur in the writing. And so for this, there are some general rules. First of all, academic writing requires you to include information and evidence or even examples from other sources. And these sources should be research-based and scholarly. They're not going to be your friend's blog. They're not going to be an influencer video. These are sources written by people who have background in the area of study, and they have the credentials to prove that. You're also going to be writing more in a clear and direct way. This is because, again, in academic writing, we want people to be able to pick up our writing and understand it regardless of where they are in the world. For a lot of research and shared thought processes that occur at the post-secondary level, people need to be able to have their work translated and still be understood in other languages. And that can't happen if the language we use is based on local cliches, colloquialisms, jargon, personification, other turns of phrases that we use, or other connotative elements, which means that the words don't literally mean what we intend them to mean. We also rarely, if ever, just sit down and do a piece of writing and never come back to it in college and university. Because of this, there is the expectation that you are going to pay attention to the details. You are going to refine, you are going to edit, and you are going to improve upon your writing because it should happen in more than one sitting. You also need to use an objective tone, which means that you are not demonstrating bias or trying to influence the reader. You also want to be formal, so you're not writing in a conversational or casual manner. You want to demonstrate an awareness of audience. Who is reading this? And for most of your assignments, it will be the instructor. So you are expected to write at a level that the instructor would be used to seeing at a college and university level. The structure of your writing is often also very rigid depending on what you are doing. For this course, you will be expected to do a 5-paragraph essay, which follows a very basic structure, but you need to adhere to that structure. In some other courses, you might write research papers or other products that have their own set of formatting considerations. A big part of academic writing, on top of making sure that the language we use is clear and direct, is that the words we use are precise and academic. So you don't want to use words that you do not understand in your writing, and you want to make sure that you are not being vague or unclear with your word choices. In academic writing, most writing focuses on third-person voice, which means you are not using words like I, my, we, us. That would be used more in casual conversations. The exception to this would be in self-reflections, but generally we want to write from a third-person perspective. We also want to use active voice, which I will discuss in a further module. But essentially, active voice puts ownership into the subject of the writing so that it's not passively discussed. It's oh so much easier to translate again. All writing at college and university should be cohesive, which means that it is connected, that there is no question what the links are between the information you are sharing. And at the heart of this, in many writing assignments, will be your thesis statement, which again I will talk about in Module 7. But your thesis statement serves as the heart of your writing. It is incredibly important and it directs both your writing as well as the reader's expectations when they are going through your writing. You also need to be able to demonstrate critical thinking and analysis skills in your writing. It's not enough to write about something, you have to interpret and analyze it and see how it connects to other things that might be related within the course. So we know a lot about what happens with poor writing. When writing has poor grammar, mechanics, tone, or other errors that are quite frankly avoidable, it can appear as confusing, unintelligent, and unprofessional. There is a lot of research that shows that people who submit a resume with errors in it and poor writing are significantly less likely to get called in for an interview because that lack of attention to detail in their writing suggests to employers that they are not serious about the position or that they do not have enough attention to those pieces such that it could cause an issue in the potential job. We also know that it can cost companies a lot of money. We see this in a number of cases where, for example, that in business, people spend a lot of time trying to interpret and figure out what is going on in people's writing. And that approximately leads to about 400 billion in lost revenue. Now that is specific to the USA context. So worldwide, it would be even more. He also found, Burnoff, that a lot of the issues with writing had issues of poor organization, overuse of jargon, being unclear, and overwriting. And all this together makes it more difficult for people to read through and understand the intended messaging in the writing. We've also seen that some companies have lost significant money because of small errors they've made in their own writing. So using one word instead of another cost General Motors 1.7 billion in a vehicle recall. And incorrect use of punctuation in a policy cost Oakhurst Dairy 5 million. We also know that poor reading takes at least 30% longer for individuals to read. So that can create frustration in the reader and take time away from the reader. And there are very few occupations where you don't need to use writing. If you are communicating poorly in your writing, you could be confusing your reader and making them feel like you are wasting their time because they are now trying to make sense of your writing. When you write, it should be clear for the reader, and that should be a large focus of your writing, making sure that whatever you have written is understood by anybody else who picks it up. It's not enough that it makes sense to you. You're the author. It should make sense to you, but it has to make sense to the reader. We also see that poor writing has been linked to higher staff turnover, poor sales, loss of productivity in jobs, issues of safety, issues of client satisfaction. And there have been lots of examples, and you might see this on the internet, where a place has put something up publicly, maybe a sign out on the road, but because of poor writing skills, it looks like they are perhaps unintelligent or careless, and that makes people think of them as a joke. Now, a big challenge is sometimes poor writers think they are good writers. This is more common in older generations, but we do see it to be true. And so you really need to be open to the feedback that instructors and other people give you on your writing. Now, writing also needs to be treated separately from speaking. A very common error that students make in their writing is writing as if they are having a conversation with somebody else. But when you are writing, you are not having a conversation with another person. So you need to write this in a way that can be picked up by anybody, and they're not going to have to email you or call you to respond to how you are writing. So you need to make sure that that formal tone is not conversational, not casual. So there are some general rules of academic writing. Now, these are standard sort of rules, but some instructors might have variations on what they accept. However, in general, these rules tend to exist for most instructors. For starters, you're not using contractions. And I'm talking about the common contractions where we would have an apostrophe. So contractions are when we combine two or three words together and we use an apostrophe to indicate where they're connected. So instead of saying it, you would actually need to write out it is. Instead of don't, you would have to write out do not. Instead of I've, you would write out I have. This doesn't apply to words that have entered the English language and been adopted. For example, the word never is actually a combination of not ever, but over time it's become its own word. So the contractions with the apostrophes are the ones we do not use. We also have to be careful about how we use abbreviations. So there are some standard abbreviations that are used in academic writing, but we have to be very specific about how we use them. And this will be discussed more in your mechanics module. This is because we don't translate well into other languages when we use contractions, because not all languages use contractions, so it might not be translated, which can lead to issues when it is put into another language. You also need to make sure that any information, examples, or statements you make need to be backed up by evidence. And this is because in academic writing, you want to be able to demonstrate that you have an educated opinion. If you don't include evidence or examples that would be then linked to scholarly research or sources, it just appears as if you just have another opinion. And there are lots of people with just opinions that exist online, so there is no benefit to that. As noted, we're also staying away from words and phrases that don't necessarily mean the same thing in other languages. So cliches, colloquialisms, idioms, slang, euphemisms, and other types of language that don't translate accurately, and therefore they might become unclear. So, for example, if I say it's raining cats and dogs, which is an idiom in the English language, that doesn't necessarily translate over into other languages because it just is a phrase we use that means it's raining heavily. But we don't want to use it in our academic writing because we want this to be accessible by anybody in the world. Your writing assignments will often have a standard structure based on what you are doing with the writing. So in this course, we do a 5-paragraph essay, and it should follow the format of a 5-paragraph essay. You also want to focus on making sure the language you use is direct and clear. It's more important than having a lot of fancy words or a lot of words that might be open to interpretation. The language needs to be specific and direct and precise, not open to interpretation, because again, we want to provide a clear message for the reader. You're not going to be using question marks or exclamation points in your writing. Again, these are often things that relate to conversational and casual language use. Your tone of writing needs to be neutral, so not biased, factual, which comes out through the evidence you provide, and formal, again, not conversational. And you're going to avoid language that could bias the reader. And importantly, you don't just sit down and write something in one go. There are often multiple drafts and edits you need to make before you have a final product. So there are some forms of language you need to make sure you avoid in academic writing. Now, if you're in a creative writing class, that's different. But for most courses, it is largely focused on that academic writing and making sure the words you use can be interpreted exactly as they are. So there's a lot of different type of language and phrasing that we use that would not be able to be used in an academic setting. For example, a cliche, these are overused expressions that have over time lost their original meanings or their impact through overuse. A colloquialism are informal phrases or words that change from place to place. So in Canada, we have terms like Mountie, toque, toonie, and these aren't words that exist in other parts of the world that speak English. They are place-based. We also avoid the use of slang, which are informal words or phrases that change from group to group. We often see this with different generations of learners, where my generation would have used the term groovy. My daughter's generation would talk about spilling the tea. But any of these sort of slang terms or phrases we avoid in our writing again because it's not universally understood. We want to avoid idioms, which sometimes do overlap with cliches. And these are phrases that mean something different than the words actually literally mean. Euphemisms are quite common when we're dealing with uncomfortable topics like death or sexuality. However, in academic writing, we want to be precise with our language. And so it's more important to be direct and specific as opposed to using euphemisms to soften the language. We have to be careful about where we use jargon as well. Now, there's going to be specialized language and terms that we use in the world of education that we would expect you to use in your writing. However, if you are writing for somebody other than an instructor, you need to consider what that person might have as background knowledge, because some areas we understand what is being said, but somebody who is also not in education might be confused by it. We also have to watch out for extra words that don't add any information to a statement, what we call redundant words, or just wordiness. Words for the sake of words. They don't add any new information, and they can often make the sentence more confusing. Now, the way we write in academia can be a little bit difficult for people who do not come from that European background. And it's because our post-secondary systems are based on the European models. And so it's not always completely free of bias because there are different ways that people speak and communicate and use writing outside of those European models. It's also not great for creative writing and fictional writing because we avoid all those special words and phrases that can bring life to our writing. Sometimes people can complain that the academic writing might be seen as elitist or exclusionary because of all the expectations and rules related to it. And this can alienate or make people feel that they won't be able to succeed in post-secondary education, which again is the purpose of this course, to make sure that you understand those rules and can follow them in your writing. Now, academic writing in English is also based on what's called Standard English. And Standard English is just the English used by governments and organizations to ensure that they are communicating consistently between one another. So it doesn't account for dialects of English like African American Vernacular English, Chicano English, Newfoundland English, and other dialects of English. So you have to make sure you're using words that everybody would understand. And if you're an English language learner, often you're also struggling with understanding the connotative aspects of a language. So, for example, on the side here, in academic writing, we want to focus on denotative language. That is the dictionary understandings of the word. Connotative language is how we use words sometimes that aren't based in the dictionary. And sometimes that involves the way words have been used historically that impact their use today. Now, the focus on writing in academics also comes out of the histories of European colonization and post-secondary itself too, and doesn't always account for the fact that many cultures have strong oral traditions where oral communication is valued over the written communication. Now, as somebody who is also First Nations, Lakota Sioux specifically, there is this misbelief that First Nations did not have written language, which is completely untrue. Many communities did have written language, my own included, with the writing systems being sort of like hieroglyphics or like other symbolic writing systems like you might see in Japan or China. The difference is writing was not as valued as oral traditions because oral language is much easier to protect. You don't have to worry about somebody picking it up and saying it's their own work. And oral traditions, when it comes to First Nations within Canada, have been recognized as evidence by the Supreme Court of Canada since 1997. As we have seen over and over again, the oral histories that are purposely trained and practiced in communities are incredibly accurate. And there have been many instances where archaeologists and other researchers have ignored First Nations telling them that certain phenomenon happened in the past in certain places at certain times until the archaeological evidence has uncovered that, oh, these things did happen, we have proof of them. You need to go no further in Alberta than the Frank Slide to see an example of this. And we see across cultures, women, girls, as well as other marginalized communities, often their writing and their experiences and their perspectives and ideas have traditionally been undervalued, in part due to those academic writing requirements that are again based in European post-secondary culture. Regardless, it is still the best system we have for now. This could change in the future, but for now we keep to it because it allows us to share our findings, our information, and our ideas across cultures in a consistent way. Now, academic integrity and honesty. If you are looking through a course syllabus or guidelines for assignments, as well as anything else where you have to produce something for a course, you are expected to demonstrate academic integrity. Academic integrity is honesty, trust, fairness, respect, and responsibility in the pursuit of learning. And all post-secondary institutions have academic integrity policies, often several, that not just identify what the requirements are and expectations are for student assignments, but might also include what can happen if you fail to demonstrate academic integrity. It applies to both the instructors and the students. So, as an instructor, it means I need to make sure that all assignments and grades are connected to the learning outcomes established for the course, that the course itself matches with the vision, mission, and mandate of the college, that I provide clear instruction regarding academic expectations, that I follow the outline and syllabus, and if there is a need to change what is in there, that is communicated to you as students, that I consider accessibility, which is making sure that the most people possible are able to access my materials, that I provide feedback on your written assignments in a timely manner. For most instructors, if you are producing an essay or other written assignment, usually you can expect to get it back within a week, and that instructors respond to students in a timely manner. So the general policy at Portage College is to respond within 2 business days. Business is key here. For example, many instructors do not check their school emails on weekends or holidays. So if you send something on a Friday, don't expect it to get back to you on a Sunday, because Saturday and Sunday are not considered business days. Now, as students, you also have expectations, and these are laid out in the Portage College guidelines. You are expected to provide accurate information to staff. Unfortunately, there have been times where students have lied about past performance in courses, or that they have done something and they have gotten in trouble for it when it was discovered that they were lying. You also need to maintain the integrity of the assignments. So unfortunately, with the internet, some students will go and take course materials and share them to third-party profit services, places like Course Hero, Course Sidekick, Athor, as well as a number of other of these online sites. These online sites make money off subscriptions from students. So students are paying them money to access that stuff in there, but that stuff has not been created by them. They have stolen information from instructors and from colleges. So if students are found to have been sharing course material, information, or even questions from exams and assignments, that can lead to academic penalties or academic suspension. You are also expected to demonstrate professional conduct by being collegial and respectful with peers, so your classmates, as well as the staff. Your email should be professional, as well as your Moodle messages. Do not casually talk to an instructor or another staff member in Moodle messaging or in email. Be professional. You are also expected to meet the expectations of the course, including making sure that your assignments are submitted on time and that they follow the guidelines. If you have any issues or problems interfering with your ability to submit work or complete work that you are required to do for a course, your responsibility is to communicate that to your instructor as soon as you can. And if you find that you are struggling or need additional support, it is also your responsibility to access student learning services or student services. If you have any issues with an instructor, you're expected to connect with them first about your concerns. You should never go above the instructor. For starters, you'll just be told to go and talk to the instructor first. That's what we would expect people to do in a professional situation. If somebody was at your job and complained to your boss, instead of telling you exactly what a concern they have is, you might be upset because they did not take that time to connect with you first. So make sure you give that same respect to your instructors. And very big and important point, you are expected to not plagiarize or misuse AI for your assessments. And we're going to go over what this means, but in essence, you need to be very careful about the information you borrow or use from other sources. So plagiarism is a major concern within colleges and universities, and certainly within kindergarten to grade 12 as well. Plagiarism is when you use the thoughts, ideas, words, or other creations of somebody else or some other organization, but do not credit those people or organization. Instead, it appears as though you did this yourself or came up with it yourself. Now, Portage College's academic dishonesty guideline identifies 5 types of plagiarism. Cut and paste plagiarism might also be called word for word plagiarism. This is when somebody takes words exactly as they are written from another source and puts it into their own work, trying to pass it off as their own. Patchwork plagiarism is similar to cut and paste plagiarism, but it's where we take pieces from different places and put them together. Paraphrasing plagiarism or idea theft. This is when you're not using the exact words, but you are still sharing the same ideas or information as another person has without acknowledging that person or organization. Self-plagiarism occurs when you submit an assignment and then resubmit it to another instructor for another course, or you don't recognize your own former writing in new writing. So if you feel like you should be able to submit the same assignment for different courses, you're actually expected to check with both instructors to see if you are allowed to do this. And then global plagiarism, sometimes called WWW theft, is when you take an essay or another assignment from somebody else. Sometimes people pay for these to have somebody else write it for them. And again, this is not your own writing, so it consists of plagiarism. If an instructor suspects that you have plagiarized within your assignment, they are able to investigate. If you are caught plagiarizing in your assignment, the first time it happens, you will get a warning letter from the program coordinator, and this will be placed in your student file. And you will also be required to complete a Moodle course specifically on plagiarism before you can continue your studies. In some cases, you may be allowed a redo of that assignment based on the instructor's discretion. And that occurs when an assignment is not in the place of a final exam. If a redo is not permitted, your assignment will be given a mark of 0. If it is found that you have plagiarized a second time, you will be required to redo the whole course. You will get a 0 on the course that you are currently in and will need to redo it. You will also be given a sanction letter from the dean of the program, and this will be noted on your academic transcript. If you plagiarize again, then you will be put on academic suspension for a year, which means you will not be able to attend the college. And oftentimes that means that other colleges will also not accept you for that time. You will have a suspension letter issued by the dean, and this will also be noted on your academic transcript. If after that you reapply, you could be accepted on a conditional basis, whereby you would be closely watched and monitored to ensure that you are not doing this again. So plagiarism is quite serious, and yet students continue to do it. Thus, we need to include it in this course. Now, why do we care so much about plagiarism? There's actually a few reasons. One, it doesn't demonstrate your own learning. Instead, what you have done is taken information from somebody else, but that's not your own learning. That is somebody else's learning. It doesn't meet the expectations of the course or the program you are in. And it tells us as instructors that you are probably not able to meet the learning outcomes of the course because you are relying on this other information. Plagiarism is why we spend a lot of time on things like citation and referencing, which we will focus on specifically in Module 5, but you are expected to demonstrate in the outline in Module 7 and in the essay in Module 8, as well as in all other course assignments throughout your program. You also need to make sure you ask the question when you are writing, is this something an 8th grader would know, or is this common knowledge? Would somebody on the street, if you ask them, know about this information? And so this occurs when you provide information in your writing that the average person would not know. So you need to make sure you have source evidence to show that this is not just your opinion again, but this is an educated piece of information. Now, I would like to highlight at this point that when you submit written assignments to the college, you will be seeing something like this because we use a system called Turnitin, which many colleges and universities use. When you submit an assignment, it will compare your writing to everything else that other people have submitted, not just to our college, but all other colleges and universities that use the program, as well as to what is available online. And when we see that there is highlighting showing that the information you're providing has come from other sources, this leads us to investigate for plagiarism. Turnitin also allows us to see where you got that information so we can go and check that for ourselves. So you will be given what's called a similarity score when you submit written assignments. If your similarity score is anything more than approximately 40%, and this will depend on the assignment, sometimes it should be lower than that. 40% is sort of the highest you would ever expect. If it's more than that, that indicates that you might have a plagiarism issue within your assignment, and you can see this when you submit it. It takes a few minutes to load, but then it will give you your score, and you can actually go in and see how your assignment matches up to other things. Now, over the past few years, the use of AI has also become a concern in education systems because AI is a great tool to help you figure out what you're going to write about, uh, come up with specific topics. I often recommend to students that they use AI tools to check your mechanics, so things like punctuation, spelling, grammar. But AI should never be writing for you. You are the one that needs to demonstrate your ability to meet the assignment guidelines, which means that AI should not be doing that for you. And if you use AI, you're expected to also cite and reference, or in the case of our essay, disclose its use. AI is actually still pretty easy to determine if it's being used. As an instructor, I will commonly give questions or prompts to AI that are used in assignments to see the different ways that it provides information back. And I'll do this in multiple AI tools so that I know what I can expect to see if a student has used AI in their assignment. So please do not use AI to write for you. If it requires investigation, if an instructor is suspicious, just like with plagiarism, they have the authority to check and investigate your assignment for AI misuse, which is why when you are submitting written assignments, you are expected to submit the original document. Usually this is a Microsoft Word document which ends in .doc or .docx, because we are able to then check how you developed your writing through looking at things like version history and the metadata in the document itself. If you are found to have misused AI, it's going to follow the same process as plagiarism, because again, this is saying that you didn't do this, something else did. Now for Module 8, you're also expected to disclose if you used AI to help you out with things like generating ideas or checking your mechanics. And those two things are fine to use AI for. Again, it's when you have the AI write for you that it is the problem. So before you submit assignment 8, which is the essay, you are going to have to disclose if you've used any AI tools and how you used them. If you didn't use any, you can just say, I didn't use any AI tools, and then go ahead and submit your essay. This is just part of that honesty process in academia. Please don't use AI to write for you. Please don't plagiarize the works of others. We want to see what you understand and what you can do. That's what we are marking. We are not going to be able to mark the work of other people or artificial intelligence because they're not in our class. You are. So please make sure you are demonstrating your own knowledge and skills. So for this module, make sure you've completed the notes. There is also an expectation that you read chapters 1 of Horkoff, which will talk a little bit more about academic writing, as well as chapter 6 of Kaiserman, which will talk a little bit about word choices, specifically the types of words that we might want to avoid in academic writing. There is also a video to watch from Scriber on the Moodle under Module 2. And then once you feel that you are comfortable with all this, you can complete Quiz 1, which is based on the notes you will take for those different elements, including this video.